Welcome to Episode 7 of OA On Air's Federal Insight, an O'Neill & Associates podcast. Today we bring you Chaos in the Air. OA account executive Ben Craig sits down with Senior Vice President and former Managing Director of the National Transportation Safety Board, Peter Goelz, to ask why we've been reading about increased delays and cancellations impacting not only our nation's passengers, but the world's airlines, airports, and travelers in the recent weeks and months. Listen on for plenty of traveling tips for planning your next flights, as well as insights into how Congress may be looking to help ease continued disruption. This is Episode 7 of Federal Insight.
Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us today on this new episode of Federal Insight, the podcast. Thrilled to sit down with you, tackling and discussing the chaos that's happening around the commercial aviation world right now. It's important to note that we aren't just going to be focusing or referring to the chaos for domestic flights or just for international flights. What we want to talk about today is the confluence of factors that have been plaguing airports, airlines, and passengers for many months now. And I think many of us envisioned, at least at the end of last year, that the summer of 2022 had the potential of being some sort of renaissance for commercial aviation. At least many were very hopeful for that. However, as we've started to watch passenger levels almost reaching back to pre-pandemic numbers, there's a number of external and internal factors that have intruded, delaying flights and wreaking havoc on travelers. So Peter, kind of the question of the day, just to get us started, can you help us break down what's happening right now and how exactly did we get here?
Well, you're right, Ben. I mean, there is chaos in the air, and it's affecting almost every airport in the United States and even the major overseas airports. The big eight, Heathrow, Gatwick, Charles de Gaulle. There's been chaos there for the past couple of weeks. And it really goes back to two things. The airlines were really devastated by the pandemic. And in the United States, the taxpayers turned over $54 billion to help the airlines get through what went from, the most busy they had ever been to nobody on planes. And in response to that, while the $54 billion was supposed to pay to keep valued employees, on the payroll, keep them in the system, so when the pandemic, was relieved somewhat, that the airline industry could again be the cornerstone of our economy. What happened was the airlines took advantage of that and used it to offer what were pretty attractive retirement packages, particularly for pilots. And there were a large number of senior pilots from virtually all the airlines that took those retirements. And of course, the more senior you are in the airline business, the more you're paid. So the airlines were offloading their most expensive, but also their best employees. And when travel started to gear up this spring, there were two things that were clear. One was there weren't enough employees, not enough pilots, not enough flight attendants, not enough baggage handlers, and there really weren't enough airplanes either, because the air carriers parked their older, less fuel efficient airplanes, planes that they would normally might have used in reserve. So they hit the summer busy schedule, understaffed, and it was ripe for a problem. Now the airlines have been blaming it on air traffic control. Not the case, and it has been a problem that the airlines have known was coming. and it is spread overseas. As I say, with the big eight, uh, overseas airports have just had chaos, and there again, they just don't have enough people to man the number of flights that they're handling. Heathrow is capping the number of passengers per day, and other international hubs are going to start doing the same. So it's going to be a very challenging July, August, and into September.
Sure, sure. Thank you for that. I think it's very helpful to see some of the actions leading up, as well as some of the responses that we've seen from the airlines and the airports. Obviously, we've heard one of the loudest groups, the passengers, the travelers, and I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for what consumers can be doing about this. How can they plan, especially as we're looking to a few months ahead of us of these continued delays?
Yeah, I think there are things that consumers, passengers can do that can it might not eliminate the threat, but it can minimize it. And it takes a certain amount of involvement on the part of passengers that might not have been there before. For example, you really ought to book your flight before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If you can get the earliest flight out, try not to connect, particularly if your connection is after 2 p.m. You know, with uh, with the summer storms, they start building about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I know in DC, I counted that there were 4 nights in the last 7 in which thunderstorms disrupted air travel
Mm.
after 4 o'clock and before 8 o'clock. So the first thing is book your flights as early as possible. The second thing is don't try to make a connecting flight after 3 o'clock because you're going to run into you could very possibly run into to storm trouble. And when you're at the gate, when you're looking at it, you've got to be a road warrior. You got to look at if you're waiting on a connecting flight coming in. Look and see where it's coming in from. Ask the gate agent, has it left the gate yet? Make sure you have the app from the air carrier on your phone and be familiar with it. And if you can, book the flight through the air carrier. If you're booking through third party sites and there starts to be problems, you will get less service than if you book with the carrier directly. And there's just you really have to take responsibilities for yourself. And if you see things starting to go bad, uh, move fast. You know, get on the app, start to make your changes, start to reschedule, and become, and probably most important, become familiar with your rights as a consumer. It was just 10 days ago that a a Delta flight from Detroit, from Michigan to Minnesota was oversold, which is not uncommon.
Mhm.
Most carriers oversell their flights by a few seats. This one was oversold by 7 seats, and the Delta started offering reimbursements for anyone who would wait.
Mhm.
Uh, the final price that they paid was $10,000 per ticket, and the Road Warrior uh, websites are filled with stories of the road warriors who take advantage of that.
Yeah,
They find where there are heavily booked flights. They know they're going to be oversold. Storms are coming. They
sure.
book it, and the airlines, that there's no cap on what they're obligated to offer you. So if you don't go early, uh, make them pay if they are overbooked. And if you can rebook it, they will pay you a fairly handsome price. Um, and if I had to say, repeat one thing, it's book your flights early in the day.
Mhm.
Our system is a web and a spoke and hub system in most cases. And the first few flights of the day are the most important for the air carrier. If they get those flights off on time, then the delays and the problems don't start cascading through their system until later in the afternoon. Every aircraft uh, in that system is probably flown 3 separate times during the day. And if they get off the first flight 20 minutes late, by the time it reaches its third flight, it's probably an hour and a half late. And they just if you can get yourself on the first flight, uh, it'll go as close to being on time as possible. And then the other tip is the last flight in at night has to get in.
Mhm.
So if you've got to fly, after 3 p.m. in the afternoon, book it after 7, because that last flight that leaves to from Boston to Detroit, it has to be there in Detroit that night, because they've already sold the seats and it's leaving first thing. So you'll get there. You may not get there on time, but they will get you to your location.
So, Peter, just a final question here. I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball a little bit. Next year, I know 2023, we will see an FAA reauthorization. So we're experiencing some of these issues, analyzing their causes, possible solutions. What do you see making its way in?
Well, the number one issue is pilot shortages. There simply aren't enough pilots uh, in the marketplace right now to satisfy the demand. And the FAA requirement, which was put in after a tragic accident outside of Buffalo, New York, is that a pilot for a commercial license needs 1,500 hours of training and flight time. And that most people believe is excessive. And it certainly is very expensive. And it limits the number of new pilots entering the market. And it makes, for instance, military pilots, which used to be a source for the major carriers, the military branches are paying hefty retention bonuses. So that pipeline is virtually dried up. The Congress is going to have to look very carefully at the 1,500-hour rule and try and figure out how they can modify that to get more pilots into the queue. And the European carriers do not require 1,500 hours; they require far less. And in the European system, you train to the aircraft type that you're going to fly. So you'll spend 250 hours flying a Boeing 737.
Mhm.
And the Czech pilots that I've spoken to from the European carriers just recently say that the trainees coming out of those schools are extraordinarily well trained. In the US, you just have to get the hours. So you can sit there and tow a banner along the Miami beach for 3 hours a day. And but the question is, does that really help you become a better pilot? After about 100 hours, probably not. And I think that there's ways in which we can not compromise safety,
Mhm.
get the pilots that we need online, and solve the problems during the rush during the summers if we let the facts drive the argument.
Great, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you for listening to episode 7 of OA on Air's Federal Insight podcast, Chaos in the Air. This episode was recorded on Thursday, July 21st, and was produced by me, OA Account Executive Ben Craig. A special thanks to Senior Vice President Peter Goelz for joining us today. If you want to make sure that you're one of the first to catch our latest conversations, newest insights, and first-hand takes from stakeholders, then please be sure to like and subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.